Section 5 of Topic 1 of Paper 6 covers the Code of Conduct. Now, we've covered, or you may have covered, the Code of Conduct in a lot of detail in Paper 1. If not, I will be going through some of the main points of the Code of Conduct without going into in great detail. It's all there for you to read. Will it be heavily examined at Paper 6? You may get one or two questions from the Topic 1 material on Code of Conduct, but the Fund Manager Code of Conduct is the code that will get a lot more questions, and we cover that in Topic 3. Now, having mentioned the Fund Manager Code of Conduct, if we look at the third bullet point on page 28, it says the FMCC, Fund Manager Code of Conduct, states that it does not replace other codes, including the Code of Conduct. And it then goes on to say, where there's an inconsistency between the Fund Manager Code of Conduct and another code, for example, the Code of Conduct, the more stringent provision will apply. Therefore, asset managers must consider the provisions of the Code of Conduct. So that gives us justification for covering in Paper 6. Remember, breaches of any of the codes are not legal offences, but any breaches will be taken into consideration by the SFC when considering whether or not you're fit and proper, and ultimately whether or not you can hold your licence. There are 9 general principles in the Code of Conduct. There they are at the bottom of page 28, from honesty and fairness through to responsibility of senior management. Now, let's run through these principles. I'm not going to go into all of them in great detail, but I will pick out 1 or 2 points. Principle 1, honesty and fairness, is standard material, and if you have done Paper 1, you will have seen this before. General Principle 2 on diligence points out that when you're dealing with client orders, you should act with prompt execution, best execution, prompt and fair allocation. Telephone orders should be centrally recorded, and the recordings kept for at least 6 months. You'd be amazed how many times that sort of thing does pop up in an exam. Mobile phones, are you allowed to use them for taking client orders? It's strongly discouraged by the SFC, but it's not prohibited. Principle 3 covers capabilities of both individuals and intermediaries, and with regard to intermediaries, really the bulk of it is under the internal control guidelines, which we will be looking at in the next section, section 6. Principle 4 on information about clients is the word know your client. Who is the client that is behind the order or behind the portfolio that you are managing? And as it says there, you should confirm true and full identity, financial situation or strength, investment experience, investment objectives. Now, there is standard material on KYC listed there, as well as suitability and mis-selling. The SFC very much frowns upon mis-selling of products, especially to retail investors, and will discipline accordingly. We have some material, as you can see there at the top, page 31, from 6th of April 2019 on online distribution and advisory platforms, ODAP guidelines. We've got a little bit of material on that, not too much. Client agreements, yes, you must have a written client agreement before you provide any services to a client, and details of what should be in and how you should process client agreement are listed there on page 31, as well as discretionary account agreements or authorities from client in writing that you can operate a client account using your own discretion. The points are on page 32. General Principle 5, the information that you should provide to your clients. This is information for clients. The idea is to provide an element of transparency. The third main bullet point there, this is something that is being encouraged more and more now. Following sales-related information needs to be disclosed to a client, that is other than a PAI, that's professional investor, prior to the point of sale, the capacity in which the licensed registered person is acting, any affiliation with the product issuer, monetary and non-monetary benefits, and the disclosure should be made in writing. If not, verbal disclosure should be swiftly followed by written disclosure. All these little bits and pieces are relatively easy to examine. You're not going to see all the principles examined, maybe one or two. Now, one of the principles that's a favorite for examination, General Principle 6, conflicts of interest. You should avoid conflicts of interest with client. If you cannot avoid, then you must inform the client of the conflict, and then it's up to the client as to whether or not you continue. This principle also covers the handling of client orders, rebates, soft dollars, connected transactions. Now, with soft dollars, if your fund manager is directing trades to a particular broker, you could well receive complimentary goods and services. But for that to be valid, the goods and services must be of demonstrable benefit to the client, and that is the first of the last set of bullet points at the bottom of page 34. Goods and services permitted by the SFC are listed there, and those that are not permitted also listed, starting with travel and accommodation. This is under conflict of interest, so obviously they're wanting to make sure that any goods or services that could compromise your independence are not permitted. And then requirements in relation to receipt of money or cash rebates. It says that licensed person must describe its practices regarding rebates, and the client must consent in writing. Brokerage rates not in excess of customary full service rates, and rebates and their approximate values disclosed to the client. And this is with regard to discretionary account management. And as we'll see, that is distinct from managing collective investment schemes, and we'll see that at the beginning of topic 3. The point I wish to make is if you're a manager of a collective investment scheme, not a discretionary account, a collective investment scheme, you are not permitted to receive cash rebates. That's a very particular point. General Principle 7 on compliance reminds us that we have to comply with all the rules and regulations that are in front of us. Specifically, it looks at employee dealings. Are employees allowed to deal for their own account? Well, there must be a written policy specifying whether or not it can be done. And in that policy, there'll be details of how it is administered. Senior management of the intermediary must be aware of the employees who are dealing and the trades that they're entering into. Complaints should be dealt with promptly, and we've got a little bit there on expert witness. At the bottom of page 36, that's the only exam where they cover the concept of expert witness. Responsibility for acts of employees, top page 37. Yes, intermediaries are responsible for the acts of their employees. And just after that, before 5.1.8, we list all the notifications that you are required to make to the SFC. And you should make those reports in writing immediately on discovering, and they're listed there, very standard. General Principle 8 on client assets. Well, in topic 2, we're going to see that there are 2 specific areas where client assets are regulated. That is the client securities rules and the client money rules. General Principle 8 is much wider, much broader in scope, and there it's telling us that the licensed person should ensure client assets are properly accounted for and safeguarded. Now, General Principle 9 on the responsibility of senior management used to be fairly standard. It used to be that senior management should bear primary responsibility for ensuring maintenance of appropriate standards of conduct, etc. And that senior management should properly manage the risks associated with the business. But this was added to quite significantly with the introduction of the concept of managers in charge, and you will see the 8 categories of managers in charge at the top of page 38. So the principle of responsible senior management doesn't just apply to all directors, including shadow directors and responsible officers. It also now applies to managers in charge. Now, managers in charge don't necessarily need to be licensed. For example, finance and accounting. You're not carrying out a regulated activity. But the SFC wants to know who the managers in charge in these areas are. They want to know when they change, and they want these managers in charge to have the same responsibility as senior management under this code, even though they don't need to be licensed. Having said that, please remember the first 2 on that list, overall management oversight, the key business line, those that are in charge of those activities are required to be responsible officers. So they must be licensed and then approved as responsible officers. Section 5.2 on page 39, conduct requirements of electronic trading. Now, this came in with computer trading algorithms, flash crashes, etc. Not heavily examined, but I will highlight 1 or 2 points that have come to the examiner's attention. Management and supervision, the second subheading. Design and operation of an electronic trading system should be effectively managed and adequately supervised, including written internal policies and procedures, at least 1 responsible officer or executive officer responsible for overall management and supervision. Now, that's a tricky one, because we know that you should have 2 responsible officers per regulated activity. But the management and supervision of electronic trading, you need 1 responsible officer, and that has popped up in an exam question. And adequate qualified staff, technology, and financial resources. And then they go on to point out the controls required to make sure the system is adequate, reliable, secure, etc. Now we come to section 5.3, professional investors. Now, what we do here is we identify who the professional investors are, and then what the protection that they do not require. Because professional investors do not need the same degree of protection as retail investors, because they're expected to know what they're dealing with. The 3 major categories: institutional professional investors, corporate professional investors, and individual professional investors. And each of those categories is detailed in sections 531, 532, and 533. I want to point out 1 point under individual professional investors. They are high net worth individuals having a portfolio of not less than 8 million Hong Kong dollars. Now, that's just over 1 million US dollars. And in the world of wealth management, no, that's not an excessive amount. But please bear in mind that the portfolio includes spouses, children, where portfolios are held jointly. What it does not include is the portfolios of siblings and parents. So please remember that, because that's something that has been examined. So when you are looking at this criteria as to whether someone can be treated as an individual professional investor, you look at that person's portfolio and you add to it any portfolios held jointly with spouse and children, not siblings and parents. Okay. We then list the waivers applicable to the professional investors under the Securities and Futures Ordinance provisions. Its unsolicited call provisions are not applicable, and requirements for offers by intermediaries, but there's no detail on that. Then the non-applicable code of conduct requirements are listed. Information for clients, information about clients, client agreement, the need to enter into a written client agreement and provide risk disclosure statements, and waivers with regard to discretionary accounts. Now, please read through that material, but it's unlikely you're going to be examined on that detail. I'm going to show you in a moment what you can be examined on at paper 6. Now, there are different combinations, and I've shown those in bold. Now, institutional professional investors, they're automatically exempt from all the listed requirements. Corporate PIs and individual PIs, you must be satisfied that they have the requisite knowledge and that you inform them that you are going to treat them as a professional investor. Now, with corporate PIs only, this is like family offices. If the licensed registered person is satisfied that the corporate PI has appropriate corporate structure, appropriate investment process controls, investment decision makers, are aware of the risks, then the corporate PI is exempt from all code of conduct. But those conditions have to exist for that to be the case. They then tell us separate assessments should be made in respect of different product types or markets. With a corporate professional investor, I'll repeat that, you should make separate assessments with regard to different product types and markets. And if there has been no investment activity in a particular product or market for more than 2 years, an additional assessment should be made. Now, this is for corporate PIs, and that has been examined. So please, it may seem a small point, but the examiner considers it important with regard to corporate PIs.